Well, I want to introduce our third speaker this morning. Our speaker is Dr. Michaela O'Donnell. She is currently the executive director for the Dupree Center, and she is at Fuller Theological Seminary. All right. Michaela is a practical theologian and leader with the heart of a seasoned entrepreneur. She writes and teaches about how to renew our sense of calling and career in a changing world of work, culture, creative leadership, and also how to apply and truly practice theology. She is also co-owner and managing director of Long Winter Media, which offers branding and video services for social impact. Michaela recently released Make Work Matter, Your Guide to Meaningful Work in a Changing World, which Michaela and I did an entire podcast on, which was a lot of fun, wonderful book. She wrote this in order to help close the gap between what you're doing now and the life-giving work you desire to do. So please join me in welcoming Dr. Michaela O'Donnell.
Okay, first of all, I have to admit, I'm like 100% the person that tries to slip out right now. I was like, ooh, Robert's talking to me. Also, thanks for the very generous intro. I love the work that Center for Faith and Work LA is doing. If this kind of cohort that they were describing had existed when I was kind of new to the world of work, it's probably something I would have done and loved, and I don't know, maybe I should join now and get a refresher. So just very grateful for the work that y'all are doing, and thank you for having me here today. So, like Robert said, I am the executive director of the Max Dupree Center for Leadership at Fuller Seminary. Okay, I got it right. Sometimes it's hard to say that long title. Let me tell you just a little bit about what we do, so then I can tee up what we're going to do together. And let me test out. There we go. Okay, creativity, resilience, and calling is where we're going. So the Dupree Center for Leadership is named after a man called Max Dupree. Max was longtime CEO of the Herman Miller Company. Anyone know the name Herman Miller? Okay, a couple. All right, great. Okay, Abby, good job. You passed the test. Abby works with me at the Dupree Center. The Herman Miller is famous for like Eames chairs and the phrase mid-century modern. They sort of revolutionized office furniture in not just we make cool things that look good, but the philosophy of the company was, you know, people, as we move from an agricultural to an industrial to an information age, people sit a lot, and bodies matter. And let's make those chairs that we're sitting in really comfortable. It was a very Christian ethos. I never got to meet Max. He passed away before I came into this role. He was longtime also, in addition to being CEO at Herman Miller, he was longtime chair of the board at Fuller, had lots of grandchildren. And when I hear stories of Max, I get this picture of this man who was who he was wherever he was, right? Lived this kind of seamless, I am consistent. I'm going to show up with my grandkids the same way I'm going to show up in a boardroom, the same way I'm going to show up in my church responsibilities. And it's that thing, that ability to sort of move through the world as one whole person, understanding where you fit and responding to God, that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to help leaders do the very thing that Max did. We talk a lot about doing the inner work that comes with leadership, right? The inner work that comes with being a human in this day and age, the inner work that comes with trying to be a Christian and live and work in distinctly Christian ways in industries that might have nothing to do with Christianity. So we have tons of programs and resources all about cultivating this inner work. Like Robert said, I truly feel in my professional life like I'm sort of split. I don't know if anybody else feels this way, but I'm like half, yeah, I get some head nods already. Okay, half a practical theologian and half an entrepreneur. And so on any given day, I'm like, ooh, which of these kind of goes forward? I don't know. And, the more I talk to people, I encounter a lot of other people who have that same kind of tension. Maybe not practical theology and entrepreneurship, but I'm a person living in different spheres in life and work, or they look different and they ebb and flow and they demand different things of me. How do I show up? I wrote a book called Make Work Matter, which Robert was talking about. It basically was a a letter to myself 15 years ago, in many ways a letter to myself present, trying to work out some of that. How do we show up in the world? I want to start with just a couple of stories. So in the last month, I had a week in which there were 4 conversations that stood out to me. One, I was at an airport, and I was was renting a car, and I was looking for the budget fast break area. This is like for people who have decided that they do not want to take the time it takes to stand in line. They want to move quickly, right? It was not open, and I felt myself starting to get like a little frustrated, a little grumpy. And I was like, why isn't this open? I need to go. I need to be somewhere. I have a meeting. Like, I need to go. And I felt like God just sort of like did that little thing that sometimes God does where it's like, can you like chill out for a second? Can you stop with all the like, I have to be this place and do these things? And so I stood in line and I waited and I got to the front and I asked the same 4 people that I'm gonna tell a story, I asked the same question. And the question was like, how you doing? You know what this lady behind the counter said? She said, actually, I'm not doing very good. She said, 3 people called in sick to work today, and there's like 2 of us left, and so we're like having to do all the work they were supposed to do, and we're getting yelled at by a lot of people in the middle of it. I'm like, ooh, that sounds really tough. Like, also, like, maybe I shouldn't be so cranky, right? I was on my way to a meeting with a CEO in Silicon Valley. This is a very successful person. This is a person who has worked to take his company public. I asked him a bit about that process. I'm like, what was that like? He's like, I had 300 meetings over the course. Yeah. Can you even imagine? 300 meetings over the course of this short, condensed time, asking people to buy into what he was selling. And I said, like, how you doing? And he said, not good. He said, Michaela, I have to be honest with you. I don't know the last time I felt joy in my work. I used to love what I did, but now it's so intense, and then COVID happened, and all the things are different, and all the changes keep happening, and everyone is looking to me to be a problem solver all the time. And I know I'm the CEO, and I know I'm supposed to be an optimist, and that's really the thing I'm supposed to give this company, but it's really hard to be optimistic, right? Third conversation, a pastor. I love church planters. I love pastors. It's like hard. Any pastors in the room, like you got a hard job. I was having a Zoom call with one of these pastors, and I said, "How you doing?" And he said, "Not good, Michaela." He said, "I have all this extra work that nobody sees, and everybody's got new ideas for me, and I'm just trying to stay afloat, and I don't even know, and it's this." He said, "All my work feels hidden. It all feels hidden." And I'm like, that sounds really tough. Last person, my daughter's kindergarten teacher. We were having like a little conference call, a little parent-teacher conference. I'm like new to parent-teacher conferences, so I'm like learning how you do it. I don't think how this one went is how they normally go, but maybe it is. I don't know. The parents in the room can school me later. We started it, and I said, like, how you doing? And right, I'm getting myself in more trouble, but also learning a lot each time I ask this question, all in 1 week. And she said, honestly, Michaela, not good. She said, it's March, and the kids are like usually where they are in November, and this whole year feels different, and we have all these metrics of success that we're supposed to hit, and I'm not hitting any of them. And you know what, Michaela? I said, what? She said, I have 4 kids who still haven't made friends. And at this point in the year, everybody's made a friend by this time. But COVID has taken so much from us. Like, I'm not doing well. And I mean, this image on the let's see, my left, I think your left, of escalators is almost laughable at this point. But this idea that careers and work and this sort of like upward climb thing that, by the way, used to work really well for some people, never really worked for other people. Like, that's the way that work used to sort of be. And now, so many people I talk to, these present 4 included, describe their regular work lives as feeling much more like this person riding down the Whitewater Rapids. They're like, I'm here, and I don't know what to do, and it's just my head is down, and I'm trying to survive. It would be 3 years ago, a little over 3 years ago. My son is 3. I have a 6-year-old and a 3-year-old. And I was in the very new stage of motherhood, like the coffee stains on your arm, like, you're grateful if you got coffee that day. Like, mostly it's just a big blur. And my son was 6 weeks old, and it was right then that one of my best friends called and said, I think I need to get a divorce. And I'm like, oh. And she said, and I think I need to come live with you. Now, we live in LA. We live in a 2-bedroom, 1-bath house, and we had 2 children, one of which was a newborn. You can imagine exactly how much room there was for her to come and live with us. If you're guessing 0, you are correct, right? So there she was. And I'm like, what am I going to do? Tell her she can't live with us? No. So she came, and she lived on our couch, and I would spend most of the day, and then obviously the night as well, like caring for my son and doing the things you do when you're keeping a baby alive. And I'd spend all the in-between times talking to my friend about the fact that her life was falling apart. And if you want like a visual of what this really looked like my husband, he is a wonderful man, would make us cookie dough, not cookies, just cookie dough. And my friend would bring beer. So we were drinking beer and eating cookie doughs. I was drinking very little amounts of beer because of the baby, but we were eating cookie dough, drinking beer, and we were just doing this. Several days into this arrangement, I felt like I was like, this is not sustainable. I cannot do this. This is not going to work, right? And I called my mom. My mom's like my person I call in these moments. I'm like, Mom, like, what do I do? And she said, Michaela, you are like a little boat, and you are taking on water. And unless you intentionally let water off the boat, what happens when water stays on a boat, right? She's like, you're going to drown. And when I talked with the 4 people in that week, like what I heard in all of their stories is that they are taking on water, right? And this happens to all of us. Maybe it's like not today for you, like maybe it's tomorrow, maybe it was yesterday, maybe like you're in a big season collectively, especially here in LA. It's like I travel a decent amount. In some places, it's like, oh my goodness, I don't know if COVID ever happened here, but I'm like, in LA, like, it like happened, right? Like, we like had all these things, and like collectively, we've been taking on a lot of water. So the first thing, like if I'm talking about calling and creativity and resilience, is this recognition. Like, we gotta be letting water off the boat. And at the very end, by the way, I texted Denise like several days ago, and I was like, okay, which one of us is going to do lament? Can you do it? It's sad. I'm an Enneagram 7. I want to do it. And she's like, no, you do it. So I'm going to do lament in a little bit. We'll get there as a practice for letting some water off the boat. But even beyond that, I've had to get very clear. Like, what are my individual practices for letting water off the boat? And also, when, especially in my work, do I feel like I'm taking on water, right? For me, like, not like this moment in the season, so I'm not like talking about anybody specific, but there have been times in my work that like when I see someone's name in my inbox, immediately I'm taking on water, right? Like I'm like, seriously though, I'm like, there it is. Like I'm getting head nods. And so like, I used to be that I would read the email and then I would go and I didn't even realize that I was like, this person all day long. And now I'm like, I'm like that person. I've got to like let some water off the boat. I'll give you like my favorite 3 here. We live in La Crescenta, so North Glendale. Anybody over on that side of town in the room? Okay. There's a lot of hills. My husband's from Salt Lake City. He's like, if we're going to buy a house in LA, I need to be able to see mountains. I'm like, I don't think there's mountains here, but we do look at foothills, so that we have a lot of hills in our neighborhood. And so one of the first things I'll do when I feel like I've taken on water is I will go and I will put on the hiking boots that live outside of my front door, and I will walk up the nearest hill. And by the time I have like gotten to the point that my heart rate is up and I'm starting to sweat, I can feel like water is coming out of the boat, right? My other one is dancing. I've got kids. I'm like kind of like, I don't know, maybe like not as loose sometimes as I should be, and like kids are like a nice antidote to that. And like dance parties, right? Just letting like water off the boat. My third way is cooking. I love nothing more than like in a kitchen. I feel like I wouldn't really be good on the show Chopped, but that whole idea of like, it'd be probably too much pressure. But like, okay, you have ingredients, you've got to make something. When I get to do that, I'm letting water off the boat, right? And as we let water off the boat, it's like, okay, like now we can sort of see, and maybe we've been spun around in a circle. Like, what does it mean to recalibrate here? What does it mean to recalibrate toward true north, which, by the way, is something that I think we do every day as believers, right? Every single day, calibrate, wake up in the morning, partway through the day, like as we go to bed at night and everywhere in between, like where is true north? How do we look for God, right? I'm going to get a little theological for a second, okay? Buckle up. Those of you who she's going to get theological for a moment. This is where the whole idea of calling comes in for me. And when I say the word calling, immediately I have learned that some people are like very into that idea, like awesome, like let's talk about calling. Other people are like, this word has so much baggage. It's been used and abused in this concept, like where do I even fit in this? Other folks are like, isn't this a pretty like privileged conversation? Yeah, see some head nods there, right? So bring all that, bring it with you as we go here, okay? Can you see this? Oh my goodness, my eyes. Okay, I can barely see, but don't worry, I know the nesting dolls. So it's been helpful for me to think about calling with an image, right? Our brains are wired this way. I'm sure folks smarter than me, any neuroscientists in the room could tell us why we are attracted to images and stories, but this has been helpful for me. So I'm gonna unpack these a little bit. I'll try to give some examples. So in this innermost doll, right, the one that's like core, is the call to belong to Jesus, right? This is like when Jesus like calls his disciples to come near him, or when we see on the shore of the Sea of Galilee, Jesus say like, "Follow me," right? Really, really critically, I think that any of the doing is preceded by the being, right? The belonging sets the stage for whatever we might get into. Called to belong. Next, and I love where we went this morning, is this call to create. We're in LA, right? This is a very creative city. This is usually when I have people in their minds or out loud to me, especially in smaller circles, be like, that's not me. I'm not really into that one. Like, okay, hold on with me. Hold on for just a second. Even as Steve was talking earlier about Reignite Hope, I'm like, like the creativity, both of creating the space for all of this to happen, and then actually like welding, though I'm a welding novice, so if I get this wrong, like, excuse me, but like you're actually like making a connection. You're making something that wasn't there before, right? I have a friend named Molly. We actually have a very good friend in common. Her and I are casual acquaintances. And I ran a business. My name's still on the proverbial door, Long Winter Media. My husband runs that business now that I'm at the Dupree Center. But it's a creative agency. We like make stuff. That's how we make our living. That's how I made my living for many years before I came into this role. And so I was having coffee with Molly at one point, and we're meeting over a gathering of a mutual friend. And she says to me, "Michaela, I love how creative you are. I'm just not really a creative person." I'm like, actually, like, first of all, I've been there. Second of all, Molly is the founder of an organization called Girls Gone Strong, which is something that has employed like literally hundreds of people and revolutionized the fitness industry. And when I said, like, what about all that stuff? She's like, oh my, duh, of course. But I find sometimes like our definitions of creativity they can kind of move toward the artist among us, right? So called to belong, called to create. This next one, called to participate in God's mission of redemption. A familiar idea for some of us in the room, those of us who've been in faith work kind of circles, newer to those of us that are like newer to this conversation. What does this really mean, right? This is like the, 2 Corinthians 5, like we're called to be ambassadors of God's ministry of reconciliation. Let me give you a couple of just like concrete examples here. I was talking with a guy fairly recently, And we were talking about like how this shows up in his work. He's a project manager, and so he works with a lot of spreadsheets. That's his job. And he's kind of like, I just don't know, like if like redemption and like project managing, like how does those fit together? And so I said, okay, like tell me about a time when you helped fix something that was broken at work. Like let's go back to a time. And he said, actually, there was this whole season where we were sort of like missing each other in communication as a team. And like it just wasn't working. And I'm like, well, so what'd you do? And he's like, well, I set up a conversation with everybody on the team to see like why the system wasn't working for them. And then he said, what I did was I tried to build a system around all those needs. And I'm like, well, did that work? And he's like, kind of. He's like, it kind of worked. I had to keep like going and trying and doing these things, but like this process of, creating something and redeeming it is where we see here. Now, finally, once all those dolls are nested in set, that's when we get the call to particulars. Now, this is often where we start in this conversation, but this is, particular roles, places, seasons, families, lines of work, sometimes jobs, are a context in which the other ones can play out, not necessarily the whole thing. And what I have found over time is it's kind of like a reordering that actually takes some of the pressure. Take some of the pressure off work. Like, oh, work maybe isn't like the end-all, be-all. It's this beautiful, wonderful thing, this thing that's both got toil and it's got goodness, and we can have that conversation, but it's part of a whole life lived, right? Okay, I told you I was going to do some theology. Okay, we made it. So if you sort of put that together, I'm going to do this, and I'm going to ask you a question. So this is a tee up for anyone who's feeling a little introverted. It's about to be talk time, okay? I know. I am that person, right? I'm the person who leaves, the person who needs a tee up. I'm obviously just doing this for myself. Okay, so if you put all that together, we are called to follow Jesus by creatively working in love for others, especially toward God's mission of redemption in the world, through particular relationships, roles, places, tasks, and moments, okay? Now, carry forward whatever's sticking there with you. If it's not all sticking, it's fine. If one part's sticking out to you, wonderful. Carry forward into this next question, whatever's kind of sticking out. And this next question, I'm giving a couple of you who are writing a little bit longer to write. This next question is a question that we actually use a lot at Fuller, okay? We use it a lot. We ask our students, we ask ourselves. It's part of, we would even call the regular answering of this question a practice at Fuller, okay? And I'm going to have you sort of dialogue with each other. And it's a big question, and you're going to feel like, how can I answer that in the 3 minutes that she's allotted me? I just want you to work on it, all right? I want you to work on it. And here's the question. So this is like, how do we take True North into the context of where we are right now? At this point in your journey, how do you envision God's call to participate in the work of God in the world? Let me say a few things about this, and then we'll do some conversation. So the first time I answered this question, I'm pretty sure it was something very grandiose, right? I'm like, I am called to do all these things and lead these things and be this whatever. And I don't know, maybe that was helpful, and maybe that's right where I was, and maybe that's right where God had me. But the last time I answered this question, which was 3 weeks ago, working with a group of students, I found that my answer was very, very dialed in a different way. So when I answer this question today, at this point in your journey, how do you envision God's call to participate in the work of God in the world? I sense that God is asking me to be faithful to each moment that's right in front of me, and to care deeply for whoever I'm looking in the eye at that moment. That's actually what I feel like God's asking me to do. It's that simple, okay? But also that challenging and pervasive and complex. So you can go wherever you need to in this question, but I want you to we're going to take about 6 minutes, and about 5 minutes. So I want you to take about a little bit over 2 minutes, maybe break up with a partner and see if you can kind of talk some of this out. So go ahead. And you can see over time, even just the longevity of that. And like it becomes this sense of true north, right? This true north contextualized all the way in. And what's interesting is that true north, that sense of calling, often asks us to like get all the way into the particulars in terms of like, well, what does success look like, right? Like if my sense of, let's use mine, if my sense is that I need to be present when people are in front of me and I need to care deeply about people who I'm looking in the eye, then like maybe a successful week looks like for me, like I'm not like multitasking on my email during meetings. Seriously, right? Because if that's what God's asking me to do, to be very present right there, like I need to like do that, right? Or maybe it's that I had 4 or 5 generative, these conversations, these how you doing conversations came out of my sense of like caring right about the person that I'm looking in their eye, right? I don't know that I was awesome at that, like until I could start to articulate that. Maybe I've been growing in it, but it starts to draw into laser focus, like exactly like what to prioritize. And so we won't take time on this next question, but I want you to have it, okay? Given your sense of calling, whatever you sort of ideated there, like what does success look like? What are the metrics for that? We talk a lot about metrics. I was in the Bay Area earlier this week for a very short amount of time, and after the event, somebody said, "What were your objectives? What were your metrics? Did you meet them?" And I was like, I thought about, well, if my objectives were to look someone in the eye and care about whatever is going on in them and to be faithful right to that moment, do I even have metrics for that? I don't know. Maybe I should, maybe I shouldn't, but it sparked a whole new set of questions, which it's like you think about this true north and you know what happens when you sort of recalibrate by 2 degrees over the stretch of a long period of time. All of a sudden, you're in a very different place, right? So this recalibration. What does it take, right? What does it take to be on that river to sort of say, okay, yeah, we've got recalibrated, but now we're actually going to make our way in that direction, right? We've got some water off the boat. We sort of think we know where we're headed, but how do we get there, right? How do we get there? This is where I go back to like creativity and resilience. Now, I will admit, like I'm biased by my entrepreneurial like framework. Both my parents like built businesses, and that's like what we do in my family. And we teach, right? We teach and we build businesses. So of course I'm biased by that. But I'm also biased here by the story of God, right? I did a research project several years ago where I was actually asking entrepreneurs, Christian entrepreneurs, how do you make your way in the world that seems increasingly chaotic, in which so many other people are like, ugh, like how do I sort this out? But you're like moving ahead. These 2 things came up to the top, creativity and resilience. And when these came to the top, I felt like, oh my goodness, this is like Christian DNA. This is our very first story about God. This is our climactic story in Christ. Like creativity and resilience? We can do that. We have a whole like lineage of that. We have a God who points us to that every day. We have other people who have the same true north, regardless of what our contextual true north is, right? I think that this is a particular issue here in LA. How many of you are like from LA, born and raised? Okay, how many of you moved here? Yeah, okay. So I moved here 15 years ago, I think, ish, right? I'm in like that fuzzy range of, I don't know how long I've been here, long enough to not remember when I moved. And I think that this city demands both of these in a particular way. It demands creativity. That is our output, that is our commodity, regardless of if you were in the entertainment industry. It's in the water here, right? And it demands resilience. Earlier, we're talking about high, like rent and, you know, what a mortgage costs and what it takes to like put food on the table. And this is an expensive city. This is a city where we move after opportunity, where gig work, the number of gig work is very high, where we're in industries and, even like the healthcare industry, which is not gig in the same way, we're experiencing things as any major urban city would. This is a city that demands these things in quantity, right? And this is now actually where I want to go to the practice of lament. Like, why lament in terms of creativity and resilience? Because, okay, well, first of all, let me say this. There was a third thing that came up in my research, and it wasn't just that creativity and resilience are high, it was relationships. And I'm like, oh, okay, hello, that's the church, right? So you've got first story about God, climactic story in Christ, and hello, the church. And that these things are sustained in relationships, but again, relationships in this city, and what do they look like? And I don't know about y'all, but like, I think half of our best friends moved in the pandemic, right? And before that, people are like, it's not quite working, or I need to go to this city to do this job. And it's a very particular way it plays out. And so this is actually where I think of the practice of lament. So this idea of what comes in, what we absorb, what we're going through has to find a way out. And it's the very place of lament that is often actually part of the same generative creativity, right? You look at artists, this is where you go back to sort of how artists work. And so I want to now teach you the practice of lament as a way of sort of tapping into the kind of space of creativity and resilience as people calibrated toward this true north in this whitewater rapid world, okay? So I'm going to teach you this practice. You may have done this. You may have written a psalm of lament already in your life. Great, wonderful. You will be a few steps ahead. If this is brand new to you, I'm going to kind of lay it out and we're going to track it, and then we're going to spend our last bit of time doing this. Okay, so in the Psalms, there is this, Psalms are broken up into different kinds of categories, one being Psalms of Lament. And there's a structure that you can find, okay? And the structure is like this 5-part structure. There's an opening address, and there's a complaint, right? I love this. I get this image of like the writers of the Psalms like shaking their fist at God. Like, we're mad, we're angry, we're not okay. Then, part 3, this confession of trust. We're not okay, but we trust you, God. We're really, really upset, but we know you're going to be there for us, right? This like both and thing. Petition for help and a vow of praise. So in Psalm 22, it plays out like this. Let's see if I can read. Okay, my God, why have you forsaken me? Yet you are wholly enthroned on the praises of Israel. In you our ancestors trusted. They trusted, and you delivered them. Do not be far from me, for trouble is near, and there's no one to help. From the horns of the wild oxen you have rescued me, and I will tell of your name to my brothers and sisters in the midst of the congregation. I will praise you. Now, the next one I'm going to read is actually a group of people that worked together to write one of these laments. And what they wanted to do was this was right in the middle of like, I think a major school shooting had just happened. And they wanted to write about this because they felt like this is what they were absorbing. This was what was coming in. This is what they needed to let off the boat in order to kind of keep going about their work. So I'm going to read it to you, and then I'm going to give you some time to write, either if you have paper or on your phone, and then I'll kind of call us back for a prayer and blessing at the end. So let me read this. They wrote about, they wanted to lament about high school shootings from the perspective of the parents, okay? Oh God, our precious Father, we, your children, cry out to you. Why do you, a father, allow our children to be murdered? Why do you let the murderer live? Why do you reward the unjust? We remember you saving Isaac. We remember you saving Joseph and blessing him to see his father again. We remember you saving the children of Israel. We place our trust in you. You are the same God today. as you were when you saved those children. Avenge the innocence of our children. Be with us, the mothers and the fathers of the slain. Praise you, the Father of all comfort and justice. We praise you for your faithfulness and grace and glory. Thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Now it's interesting. If I went back to the 4 people that I mentioned talking to in 1 week and asked them to write a lament, I actually don't know that any of them would have talked about like their work. Maybe they would have, but maybe they wouldn't have. They might have talked about all the stuff that they were absorbing in life that's showing up in their work. Or they might have said, my coworkers don't show up to work, and I'm really upset about that. And God, can you make things a little more manageable? So you can go in a couple directions, but I want you to work and build on the stuff that you did with calling, all right? So you'll have about 6 minutes, right? So it's not a long time. You'll have about 6 minutes. You're not going to share these with anybody, so no need to like censor yourself for like fear of vulnerability in a few minutes. And then I'll gather us back and we'll pray a blessing, okay? So here is the structure for you. Go ahead and spend a little time on that. And I know some of you are, again, just getting started. But I just want to name very clearly that over the course of my adult life, I have become very, very aware that the creativity and generativity that I seek as I make my way down the rapid rivers is connected to my capacity to name pain and let water off the boat and give that to God, right? And here we have this structure, this practice in which God invites us to do that. So let me just pray over us. God, thank you just for this group. Thank you for space. Thank you. Thank you for your first story and your climactic story and for each other, Lord. I pray that wherever we are, or if we feel like our boats have water in them or we feel good and like we're flying along, I pray that you would meet us there. Invite us to regularly recalibrate toward true north and develop practices that let water off the boat. We love you, Lord, and we pray these things in your name. Amen.